This pattern took me a while to finish and get it launched for you guys. This is the tote. It's just such a good size. It's so handy. And then we have the crossbody, which also has got D-rings on the side so you can wear across your body. In the pattern, you'll get tote and the crossbody. It's an unlined bag with a slip pocket on the inside. It's a zip top or it can be an open top. In the instructions I tell you when to miss out certain steps to make it an open top. It's super easy. I teach you how to quilt your own fabric, how to make continuous bias tape. If you don't fancy doing that, I've got the lengths if you want to buy pre-made bias tape, pre-made quilted fabric. Everything is in that pattern. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made this bag. This is pre-quilted cotton from Higgs & Higgs. They've got a really great selection of reversible pre-quilted cottons, some really nice prints, and I really love their ginghams. And then I made continuous bias tape from this cotton, which is also from Higgs & Higgs. It's just in a smaller scale gingham. I'm going to start by making continuous bias tape. Take your square of bias tape fabric. I've used these blue dots to show you which side is the right side of the fabric. Fold the square of fabric in half, right sides together, and snip a small notch on either edge to mark the halfway point. Unfold the fabric so the right side is facing up, then cut diagonally from one corner to the opposite corner to create 2 triangles. A little trick with this: if your ruler isn't long enough to span the fabric, you can press the fabric with an iron to create a crease and then cut along that line with a straight ruler and a rotary cutter. Flip the triangle over so the wrong side is facing up and place it on top of the other triangle with right sides together, and then make sure those notches are aligned. Pin the triangles together along the raw edge, then sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press the seam allowance open. Open the fabric so the wrong side is facing towards you, and now we're going to mark the width of the bias tape. So I like to use an erasable pen and a straight edge ruler and draw your first line 1.89 inch, which is 4.8 centimeters, parallel from that raw edge. Continue marking parallel lines across the whole piece of fabric. Now flip the fabric over so the right side is facing up. Fold one short end inwards so that the raw edges meet at the center seam. So have a look at the fabric and you can see these lines across it which are meeting. Take the corners of the fabric and pull gently in opposite directions, so this shifts the fabric so the bias lines become offset by 1. Now we're going to pin together the fabric. I'm pointing at one of the drawn bias lines. Put your needle in 0.6 centimeters down from the raw edge and then flip it over and double check that that pin has come out on the corresponding bias line on the other side. Then sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press open the seam. Now's the fun part where you can cut it and you'll see all of your bias tape. Now we need to fold the bias tape. I'm going to use a bias tape maker. It saves a lot of time, but if you don't have one, just have a look at the pattern instructions and I guide you how to do it. If you have a bias tape maker, unfold the bias tape you've just made. Press open all the seams, then insert the short end of the bias tape into the bias tape maker. Use a pin to push it through so it comes out the other end, and use your iron to press the seam. Okay, it's time to sew the bag. I like to add a pin to the top of the pattern pieces. This is to make sure I know which is the top and which is the bottom. You need to have 2 front and back panels, 2 side panels, 2 top panels which have been mirrored, 2 straps and an internal pocket. We're going to add the bias tape to the strap. Unfold the bias tape and put the right side of the bias tape against the wrong side of the strap. Align the raw edges. Sew the bias tape to the strap with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Follow that crease which you created when we used the iron. Then fold your bias tape over the raw edge and top stitch. Now add the bias tape using the same method to the opposite side of the strap. Now repeat this on the second strap so both your straps have the edges bound in bias tape. Take the short end of one of your straps and fold it in half and snip a notch. Take one strap and align the notch at one end with the bottom left notch on the front of the bag. The wrong side of the strap should be facing the right side of the bag. Pin that in place. Now find the top left notch on the front of the bag and center the strap over it. Pin the strap in place so it runs vertically up the bag. Take the opposite end of the strap and align the bottom right notch with the end of the strap. Now align the top right notch underneath the strap. Pin the strap in place, but don't sew it down yet. Double check that your straps are straight by measuring at the top and the bottom. Use a straight edge ruler and a water erasable pen to mark a horizontal line 4 centimeters down from the top edge on the bag, and this line should go across the strap. Now we're going to edge stitch up one strap across the line that you've just made and back down to attach the strap to the front of the bag. Before you sew down your straps, just double check that the strap isn't twisted at the top. You're going to be sewing through quite a few layers of fabric, so just take it slow. When you get to the top corner when you're going to sew across the strap, I recommend keeping the needle in,
lifting your presser foot and rotating the bag 90 degrees, and then putting the presser foot down and sewing across the strap. Now we're going to sew the bias binding onto the pocket. So I'm going to use a sticker to show you which side is the right side of the pocket. Take your bias tape and unfold it. This is the right side and this is the wrong side. Align the longest edge of the bias tape against one side of the pocket and mark 1 centimetre from the bottom. This is where you're going to stop sewing. Sew along the straight edge and stop at your stop mark. Fold the bias tape at a 45-degree angle and then fold it back on itself. Make sure the corners are aligned and straight, clip it in place and mark 1 centimetre away from the edge. So from the top down to the stop mark with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And repeat this process on the other side. And now flip it so the wrong side is facing towards you and pull the bias tape round. To fold the edges neatly, fold the bias tape which is on the side of the pocket down. Make sure it's flat. And then bring the bias tape which is at the bottom up and fold it on top of the side. Repeat this on the opposite corner and then edge stitch around the whole pocket. And you've got beautifully mitered corners. Now we're going to bind the top. So make sure you have a little excess, about 1.5 centimetres either side of the pocket. Sew on the bias tape with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And now we're going to fold the bias tape so it makes a really neat edge. Do you see the bias tape? So it looks like it's a U shape at the moment. You want to fold the bias tape back on itself so that the bias tape looks like the shape of a W, and then clip it in place. We're going to sew straight down so it's in line with the pocket. Repeat that on both sides and then trim off any excess. Fold the bias tape back on itself to conceal that top edge. Fold everything down, clip it in place and edge stitch. Now we're going to place the pocket onto the bag. Let's just pretend the pocket that you can see on the bag is the one that I've just sewn. Measure down 12 centimetres from the centre notch and mark that with a pin. That's the position of the top edge of your pocket. Pin the pocket in place. It will fit snugly between the straps. See, and it fits beautifully. My iPhone. So this step is only necessary if you're making the zip top tote. Fold your zipper in half and mark the centre with a small notch on either side of the zip tape. Take a look at your top pattern pieces. You need to make sure that the sewing marks are on the outer edge. Align the centre notch on the right side of the zip tape with the centre notch on the right side of the top. To get a really neat finish, I like to base stitch first. Using a longer stitch length, base stitch the zip with a 0.5 centimetre seam allowance. This holds everything securely for the final stitching, and then re-sew the zipper permanently. Finish the raw edge of the zip tape using a serger. If you don't have one, you can use your zigzag stitch and sew along the edge to prevent any fraying. Fold the top fabric back away from the zip teeth, edge stitch along the seam. Make sure you catch both the edge of the zip tape and the top fabric, and then repeat these steps on the opposite side. Now we're going to sew the front and the back together with a French seam. Place the wrong side of the front against the wrong side of the back. Align the bottom edges and make sure the notches match up. Then sew the bottom edge with a 0.6 centimetre seam allowance. Carefully trim down any seam allowance and then flip the bag so the front and the back pieces are now right sides together. Sew along the same bottom edge, this time with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now we're going to attach the side panels. Lay the front and back panel, which are now joined, flat with the wrong side facing up. Take one side panel and align the notches on the longest side with the notches on the side of the back. Pay attention to the markers on the top and bottom on that side panel. This is where you're going to start sewing and finish sewing. I like to snip a small notch into the left and right bottom corner on the side panel. This just helps when you're rotating the bag. Now we're going to create the base of the bag. Rotate the side panel 90 degrees so the notch in the centre of the side is in line with the centre seam on the bottom of the bag. Now sew the base. Pay attention to the markers. This is where you're going to start sewing and finish sewing. Remember, stop at that stop point, which is 1 centimetre away from the edge. Repeat these steps and sew the other side of the side panel and use the same method to sew the opposite side of the bag together. Now we're going to sew the zip top onto the top of the bag. Take the assembled top piece and close the zipper. You don't need to trim off any of the excess just yet. So with the wrong sides together, align the notches on the longest edge of the zip top with the notches on the front of the bag. Sew these two together. Remember to start sewing at one marker, stop at the opposite marker. Repeat these steps to attach the zip top around the rest of the bag. Now we're going to bind the side seams. The corners which haven't been sewn will be concealed by the bias tape. Leaving them open like this just makes binding the edges a little bit easier. Unfold the bias tape, pin the right side of the bias tape to the right side of the bag. This is important that it's the side of the bag. Pin all the way around the side seams and then stitch along the edge with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. As you sew around that bottom edge, gently pull the bias tape. You'll get a neater finish. Again, it is fiddly, just take your time. Fold the remaining bias tape over the raw seam and then edge stitch the binding to the front of the bag. Now repeat these steps to bind the opposite side of the bag. And now we're going to bind the top. Take the remaining bias tape and fold one end in by 1 centimetre. Pin this folded end to the back of the bag, ideally in line with one of the straps on the back. Clip all the bias tape around the top of the bag and then sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Fold the bias tape back over the raw edge on the top of the bag and then edge stitch. And if you've made it all the way to the end, well done, you finished your River Tote, and I hope you really love your bag.